Hello and welcome to a quick look from the Long View. My name is Jeff Gamble. I'm the host of the Long View, and today we're going to be taking a quick look and taking a quick review of the game Police Precinct. This is a game that was published by Common Man Games. The designer of the game is named Ole Steinus. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I may be butchering that, and if I am, I apologize. But this is a game that is a cooperative game, and the theme of the game is playing a police officer and trying to solve a murder while containing the crime that is in the big city while you're doing it. This is a game that appeared on my radar after I saw Tom Vassel's review, and I was very interested in trying this game because my family is one that really enjoys cooperative games. And so, knowing that, I asked if Common Man Games would be willing to send me a copy so that I could check it out and give them a review. So, after having the game now for about a month, I've played it about 10, 11 times between myself and family and friends, and I think at this point I certainly have more than enough information to do a quick look episode on this fascinating game. So, by way of introduction, Police Precinct is a cooperative game. It plays from 1 to 6 players, though I have never played it solo. I have played it as a 2-player game, and I've played it all the way up to 5 players, but not yet with 6. The game, as I said, was released in 2013, and it takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. I find that once you've played the game, a few times, you probably are looking at closer to the 60-minute time frame than 90 minutes. The game is cooperative, and it does share some things in common with other cooperative games that have come out in recent years, most notably Flashpoint Fire Rescue, I would say, and of course the sort of mothership of modern cooperative games, Pandemic. So how does this game kind of compare? How does it stack up? What makes it different? What can you do? These are all the kinds of things that I'm looking to explore in this episode. So first up, let's take a look at the game's mechanics. The game, as I said, is cooperative, and each player is going to select a role to play in this game. The role cards that come with the game are mounted on this nice, thick, sturdy cardboard with some really striking art by the same artist who did the character sketches for Flashpoint Fire Rescue, which is George Pastoris. And they're really quite evocative and really nice kind of illustrations and pictures to kind of help get you into the mood of the game. Each of the characters that you can select is slightly different. You might have a police captain, you might have a detective, you might have a SWAT team, the leader of a SWAT team. There's all sorts of different kinds of roles that you can select, and yes, there are some female roles in there, which is nice. As a father of 2 girls, I always appreciate it when there's some roles in there that are females, and that are also strong female roles, and not necessarily stereotyped or gender stereotyped in any way. So I really appreciate that. Each of the characters has 3 prime abilities. They have what's called an investigative ability. They have an arrest ability, and then they have an ability to handle emergencies. So, and these are the kind of 3 things that you're going to be doing pretty much throughout the game. You're either going to be investigating the murder that has happened. You are going to be seeking to lock down on crime by making arrests, or you could be handling various emergencies that might pop up in the city. So the theme of the game is that there's a very large kind of a board that shows a section of a city, and you are sort of playing the police officers who are in that section of the city. And there has been a murder, unfortunately, that has taken place. And the murder is kind of very abstracted in this game. It's not a game like Clue, where you're necessarily trying to determine who did it and where it happens and what the weapon used was. In this game, the weapon is always the same. It's a knife. The crime is always the same. It's a murder. There's kind of like a nameless victim. And I know that all these things sound bad, but it really doesn't, at least in my experience, detract from the gameplay, because what you're actually trying to do is you're trying to move around the city to various locations to collect evidence. And you do this through investigation. So the way the game sort of simulates your investigation is that you go to different locations, some of which are randomly determined at the start of every game. And for example, you may go to interview witnesses to the murder. You may go to the morgue and see if you can get the autopsy reports and find out what the manner of death was. You can go and look for crime scene evidence, which could include things like fingerprints or things of that nature. So you travel to the various locations around this board and you access these stacks of cards, and there's a different stack of card for each sort of element of the crime. What you'll then do is you will use your investigation points, and I'll explain more about that later, to access those cards. And the higher your investigative value, for example, the more cards you're going to get to draw from this stack. The vast majority of cards in each of these stacks is going to basically say nothing. It's going to basically say no progress. Or, for example, if you go to try to interview witnesses, it'll say no one's at home. Or if you go to the morgue, it'll say nothing yet, and it'll show you kind of a picture of an empty kind of hospital-looking slab that you would expect to find in a morgue with nothing on it. And so you have to kind of dig through these cards on successive turns, either yourself or yourself and the people you're playing with, trying to find these key pieces of evidence. If you go and you take a look at a stack of cards and you find that you got no information that's helpful to your case, then what you're going to do is you're going to get to discard one of those cards out of the game, which now makes the deck smaller, increasing the likelihood that you're going to find some good cards, some evidence that's going to help you build your case. So the deck is smaller, but then you are going to have to shuffle this deck of evidence cards, whichever particular stack you were looking at, in order to then try and have a go at it again on a later turn, or perhaps for another one of your teammates to come and try to have a go at it. So eventually, the way this mechanism works is that it is going to, help you kind of eventually get to the evidence. I mean, you can't have fruitless investigations over and over and over, because you are getting to get rid of those sort of dud cards when you do take a peek at a stack and you don't find anything of value. So that really does kind of help you move the game along. So you're going to be kind of trying to accumulate these pieces of evidence, which goes on this evidence board, which is kind of held off to the side. And the evidence board has all of these sort of outlined areas for the cards that you're going to need to complete your case. Once you have all of the evidence cards that you need, you're then eligible to arrest the murderer. And then that would be the way that you would win the game. Now, all of this doesn't sound all that difficult, or it might not even sound all that interesting, since it is sort of a generic crime. However, the real meat of this game comes from two other areas, and I'm going to try and briefly talk about both of them. The first area is that it's not just a matter of sending the players to these different stacks of cards to go and find the evidence you need to arrest the murderer. It's much more complicated than that. First of all, in the style of kind of games like Mr. Jack, for example, where there's a time element involved, where if you can't identify Jack in time, then Jack will escape. He'll get away. For those people who are, familiar with that deduction game, Mr. Jack, they know what I'm talking about. If you haven't played that game, it's a deduction game whereby one person is playing an investigator and the other person is playing Jack the Ripper. And Jack's job is to stay hidden as long as he possibly can until he's going to be able to escape. And the inspector has to catch Jack before that time has elapsed. So there is a time element in this game as well, because on the turn track that runs down the side of the board, there is a certain location that will tell you when the murderer kind of enters the board. And the murderer enters the board in this neighborhood. Every neighborhood on the board has a number between 1 and 6. And so the murderer is going to enter in neighborhood 6, and then after the next round, he'll move to neighborhood 5, and then to 4. So it really is literally a countdown. If you can't get to the murderer and solve the case by the time he exits neighborhood 1, you have all lost the game. So that's one of the things that puts this pressure on the players. The second thing, and more importantly, that puts pressure on players is the fact that there are going to be other things that are going to be happening. in the game, it's not just this one case that you have to deal with. You also have to deal with the normal kind of situations that happen in a big city, random crime. There might be a holdup at a grocery store. There could be a bank robbery. There could be, a disgruntled employee with a shotgun. You just never know what's going to pop up, and that is all driven by cards. In Pandemic, a cooperative game that many people might be familiar with, after you take your turn, you flip up a card from the infection pile, and that's going to tell you where you're going to be putting out new kind of infection disease cubes on the board, which creates a constant tension on the players. In Defenders of the Realm, which is another kind of game that's very closely related to Pandemic, you are going to be pulling cards at the end of your turn in order to place more minions on the board. In Flashpoint Fire Rescue, you're going to be rolling for the fire. So there's always some kind of pressure that these games create. This game creates pressure through this crime deck. When you flip up a card at the end of your turn, it's usually going to be something bad. There's going to be something that's happening. There's going to be some criminal activity that you're going to have to go and deal with. And these are the emergencies. If you recall, I told you at the start of this that every character card has 3 attributes. They have an investigation value, they have an arrest value, and an emergency value. The emergencies are handled by the officers while they're trying to investigate the murder. So right there, you're having to split your attention. The game uses a very clever mechanism that forces the players to not be able to ignore the other crimes going on in the city. In other words, if you ignore the other crimes that are happening, whether they're as simple as traffic accidents or whether they're as complicated as some sort of a hostage crisis or some sort of a burglary or something of that nature, if you ignore the crime, then what happens is the crime rate in the city increases. And this is like a little track on a separate little board that is included with this game. And this little track kind of tracks the crime rate of the city. And if that ever reaches a critical mass, well, then you've just lost the game. So the emergencies that are going to pop up throughout the game are creating a constant pressure on the players in order to keep everything under control while still investigating the murder. Otherwise, you're going to lose the game that way. This, of course, reminds me very much of, what happens in Flashpoint Fire Rescue, where if there's too much structural damage, the building will collapse and everybody loses. Or in Pandemic, if you have too many outbreaks, then you're going to lose that way. So it shares those kinds of elements, sort of the AI elements, in common with other sort of cooperative games that are out there. So we have, in addition to the emergencies, we also have what they call street punks or street gangs. And these are just kind of random thugs that kind of seem to wander the city. And they need to be constantly taken care of. And the way they're taken care of is by arresting. So that's where the arrest value of the character cards comes into play. So some characters have a high arrest value but a low investigation value. Some have, perhaps a high emergency value but a low arrest value. And it really depends on the character that you select. And of course, ideally, you're trying to select a mix of characters that are going to be, able to handle all of these different situations. So that's another interesting part of the game. In addition, unlike many games of these kinds of genres, for example, Flashpoint, there is specialization in Flashpoint, just like there's specialization in this game. However, this game does allow you to actually upgrade your abilities. So you can kind of go and you can become better at one of these 3 base abilities. And the reason that's important is because the number that's associated with these base abilities, and it's usually a 1, a 2, or a 3, is the number of dice that you're going to roll in order to see whether or not the action that you were attempting was successful. And that's in the case of arresting or handling emergencies. And the number for investigations is the number of those cards that you're going to get to draw and take a peek at. So these values become very important during the course of the game, and upgrading is something that can be quite important as well. So that's the two extra sort of areas of tension that I was talking about. The third area of tension that is really kind of unique to this game is that there is the possibility, depending on the number of players, that you're going to have a traitor policeman. And this is one of the things that I know that other reviewers have really liked, and I like it as well, because it adds an extra element of uncertainty to the game that reminds me quite a bit of Shadows over Camelot. So I'm throwing out all these cooperative game names, and that's because this game does seem to pull some of the best ideas from other cooperative games that are out there and synthesize them in a new way. The traitor mechanic actually is what sets this game apart. If it wasn't for the traitor mechanic, I think that this would be a good cooperative game. Certainly one that I would say, yeah, sure, I'll play it anytime someone suggests it, but I don't know that I would seek it out. The bad cop, though, really kind of elevates this game. It kicks it up a notch, and it really adds something to it, because then you have this whole layer of suspicion and intrigue, and you're not entirely sure if everyone at the table is really on the same team. And the way this works so brilliantly is those investigation cards, because anybody can go and take a look at an investigation stack, including the bad cop. And the really interesting part is that no one gets to look at those cards except the person who's pulling the cards. So, if I'm the bad cop and I pull some cards in an investigation stack, say I go to the morgue and I pull the card that tells me the time of death, I can look at the other players and say, no, nothing here. And I can discard the card that said that it was, that there was no information, but then I can take that good card and I can shuffle it back in the deck and claim that I never saw it. Now, I can't get rid of the evidence. I can't actively destroy the evidence. That would be too overt. So, but what I can do is I can kind of pretend I didn't see it. And so this then, will kind of create some suspicion perhaps from time to time. Especially as the decks get smaller and smaller and the probability becomes higher and higher that, oh man, seriously, you got to draw 6 out of the 8 cards that were left in that stack, huh? And you're seriously telling me that piece of evidence we need, that everybody knows is there, you're seriously trying to convince me that's not there? No, it wasn't there. It wasn't. Really? I don't know. Maybe this guy's a bad cop. So it kind of ratchets up the tension as the game progresses and really adds another element that I think really sets Police Precinct apart. It's probably its most distinctive feature. So this is kind of the core sort of mechanisms of the game. You're trying to solve a murder case while trying to maintain control of the city and making sure that crime doesn't get out of hand. You have to solve the case before the murderer escapes. And you also have to be on the watch, on the lookout for a bad cop that could be in your midst. So you take all of these things together and you have a very interesting cooperative game. Now, there are other elements of this game that are actually quite interesting as well. Like some other cooperative games, you do have the ability to help each other out. For example, everyone at the end of their turn gets to draw what's called a police card. And a police card is usually going to be something very good for the player who draws it. It could be a one-shot kind of an effect that could be very helpful, or it could be something that will allow you to assist another player when they're trying to make an arrest or deal with an emergency, or perhaps when they're looking at an investigation stack. You can actually contribute your cards to the active player. Now, the kind of special ability that might be written on the card, the text of the card itself isn't going to help that other player, but the tops of all of these police cards have the symbols, either the investigation symbol, the arrest symbol, or the emergency symbol, and so therefore you can give those cards to the active player in order to aid them. There's also adjacency rules. So if you are trying to handle an emergency and there are other officers nearby, they're going to be able to sort of automatically help you. If there are officers who are adjacent to where you are when you are investigating, they're going to be able to help you. So there's some other kind of neat little built-in sort of bonuses that are there to help you throughout the game. In addition, one of the things that I found really kind of interesting about the game is that there are also differences between the vehicles that the officers use. So basically, you are not represented by a pawn in this game. You're actually represented in this game by a vehicle. And one of the really kind of fun little things that I thought was a really interesting design choice was that if you choose to use an unmarked car, this is going to increase your investigation value because you're going to be kind of, under the radar, as it were, and unmarked and a plainclothes, detective, for example. But if you are in a marked car, you actually can move farther on your turn because, of course, you can always hit the sirens and hit the lights and kind of, get through traffic more quickly than an unmarked car could. There's all kinds of little thematic elements there that I really appreciate, that I think really sort of elevates this game. These kinds of little choices, kind of keep the game very thematic to me. So this is something that I greatly appreciate in the design. There's a host of other things that are there as well. There are sort of these other police officer tokens that can be sent to assist. There are the character who is the SWAT team leader can send the SWAT team to come and help during some arrests or handling of emergencies and whatnot. There are these sort of unknown circumstance counters that will be put on those random emergency cards that are drawn that will lend an element of uncertainty. When you get to the scene of the crime, it could be a burglar and he might have a weapon, or it could be not just a burglar, but it could be a burglar who has a dog with him that will attack you. And so this can increase the difficulty of the arrest. So these are all really kind of interesting and very thematic things that are added to the game. When you successfully deal with an emergency, there's usually some sort of a reward. Not only is there a reward in that you're not letting crime get out of control in the city, which will lose you the game, but you usually get some sort of a tangible reward. You might get a chance to peek at one of those investigation stacks. You might get the opportunity to not have to play an emergency card after your turn, kind of like that quiet night or all is quiet card that you can play in Defenders of the Realm, for example. So there's these kinds of other really interesting little things that can pop up during the course of the game. One of your rewards, though, I do have to say, can be a donut. And donuts are these nice little pink glazed donuts with sprinkles. They're just little tokens, and those donuts can be used. They can be turned in order to get those upgrades that I spoke about earlier. They can also be used to help you when you're trying to perform your investigations or arrests or whatnot. So they're kind of, very useful. They're kind of these bonus tokens that you can turn in. I wonder, I have a couple of friends in law enforcement, and I wish it wasn't donuts. I mean, I know that's, maybe I'm being too serious about it, but, it's kind of the cops and donuts thing. I think that, that can sometimes be a little bit offensive. I think it was totally meant to just be kind of fun and humorous and just kind of draw on that stereotype and have a little laugh at it. And, it's not like I have a huge problem with it. It's not like it's I'm morally offended by it, but I just kind of, I don't know, maybe like shields, if you could have gotten a shield for that bust or gotten a shield for handling that emergency, and then you turn in shields in order to be able to get these extra game effects. That might have been something that I might have liked a little bit better than the donuts. My kids like the donuts. They think it's funny. They're like, throw a donut. They're always saying, to get some sort of an effect or, a bonus or whatnot. And so, in terms of the game, it's totally functional. It can be fun. I just wonder for, law enforcement, people who have that background, whether they would appreciate that or not. I don't know. But that's just a one tiny little nitpicky kind of a thing that I had about the choices that were made in the game thematically. That's all, just thematically. I myself would have preferred, something slightly different, but certainly doesn't in any way affect the gameplay, and that might just me being too PC. I'll let you, the audience, decide that. Now, that's kind of a brief rundown. So let's go over the sort of actions that you can take on your turn. This is kind of the flow of the game in your turns. On a player's turn, the first thing you're going to do is move your car. You don't have to, but you can. So moving your car. Remember, marked cars move much further than unmarked cars, which is a really nice thematic element. The next thing you're going to do is perform an action. And you get to perform one action, and that action could be investigate. If you're by one of those investigation stacks. It could be arresting street punks or trying to make an arrest on the murderer if you have built all the evidence for your case. You can attempt to handle one of the emergencies that's on the board, or you can upgrade your character as well. That's something else that you can do. You can draw a police card for your action. You can reveal yourself as a dirty cop if you want. And just like in Shadows over Camelot, when you reveal yourself, really the main benefit there is you don't have to pretend anymore, and you can kind of actively try to obstruct everything. Or you can accuse another player of being the dirty cop, and that's going to cost you 3 of your donuts that you'll have to discard in order to make that accusation. So once you're done with one of those actions, then you're going to draw a police card, and then you're going to draw that event card, and that's going to be the end of your turn. Play then proceeds clockwise around the table. So you're going to continue this until you've kind of finished the entire round. Once you finish the round marker moves. This might bring the murderer on the board, or it might move the murderer from one neighborhood to the next, kind of that countdown that I talked to you about earlier. So those are kinds of, the things that are going to happen. So the player turns, I find, move extremely quickly. It's one of the things that I do like about this game, is that since you only get to perform one action, it's really quite simple. You're going to move your car, you're going to do an action. Usually it's going to be some sort of an arrest attempt, some sort of handle an emergency, or an investigation. It's rare, you don't upgrade your character that often, because it's, every kind of missed turn in this game runs the risk of kind of having things spiral out of control. So, I find so far in my plays that doesn't happen too often, but it can be very important. So, and the reveal yourself if you're the dirty cop, or accuse another cop, that's really only going to happen a couple times maybe during the entire game. So, most of the time it's very simple. Move your car, try to do something, draw your police card, flip up the event, and boom, you're done. So turns move really rapidly in this game, which I really appreciate. I find that they move even more rapidly than, say, Flashpoint, because Flashpoint, you have this action point allowance system, and, sometimes there can be a little bit of a puzzling out of, all right, how am I going to spend my action points? Have I banked any action points from a previous turn, et cetera, and then what am I going to do? So I find that these things, since this game doesn't really have that, you only have the one action, that the turns move very, very quickly, and so therefore the game moves very quickly as well. So, as a cooperative game, I would say that this game really ranks up there in kind of the tops for me. This and Flashpoint Fire Rescue are my personal, favorites when it comes to cooperative games. And I think it's because they're both so thematic. You on the one hand, you have the firefighters trying to rescue people, and in this game, you have this kind of, crime in the big city and trying to solve a murder case and trying to work together. They're both really thematic games, and I really enjoy them quite a bit. So Police Precinct, from a gameplay standpoint, is something that I really enjoy. About the only thing that I will say about the game that is kind of a bit of a negative, and I don't want to sound too harsh here, because I need everybody to understand that it didn't affect my enjoyment of the game for the most part. But that's kind of some of the components of the game, and mostly what I want to talk about is the game board. Now, the game board itself is huge. It's a beautiful board, in that it is quite large, it is quite thick, it is quite sturdy, really nice play surface area. I think it could have possibly been a little bit smaller, but, I'm not really complaining. I mean, when you get a big, heavy, chunky board like that, I always like that. So the board itself, not much of a problem. My issue with the game comes from some of the graphic design choices. And again, I shouldn't have even said that. My issue with the game components is some of the graphic design choices. Each neighborhood, for example, is labeled 1 through 6, and each neighborhood has what's called a bad hood. And I'm not even fond of the term hood. If it's a bad neighborhood or a bad street or something, okay, fine, bad neighborhood. But bad hood, I don't know. And the text, the font that's used to show these bad hoods, I swear comes straight out of like Microsoft Word art. It just seems kind of, there's weird multicolored metallic looking kind of font, and it actually doesn't stand out too well because there's a lot of gray on the board from, and grays and blacks from this kind of aerial view of a city. So you're seeing tops of buildings and the streets and whatnot. And so this kind of strange metallic writing and this kind of cheesy font, I really didn't appreciate that. The emergency cards that you draw are really very nice. The art's nice, the text is nice, but you're supposed to then place these cards directly onto the board. And so one of the things that I kind of found was that I kind of felt that the cards were like really, really big. I didn't know that the emergency cards needed to be quite that big because once you place them on the board, they really start to kind of cover things. Like they cover the name of the building, for example, where the emergencies happen, like, the grocery store or something of that nature. When you plop that emergency card down, it kind of completely covers it. And sometimes, when you have accidents, traffic accidents are placed at intersections of two streets, and you actually place the card on the intersection. And so I don't quite know what to make of it. It seems, they're nice in that they're big and that everybody can see them. I'm not arguing for, what some people call hobbit cards. I'm not necessarily arguing for teeny tiny cards that everyone has to pick up and everyone has to peer at. But it almost seems like they're a little too big, or that I almost wish that the buildings were a little bit bigger maybe, so that like when you place the card down on the building or down on the location, you could still see what the location was or what it was supposed to be. I think that would have been, something that I would have preferred. I also might have preferred like a slightly larger city. We're really only looking at this 6 block by 4 block kind of grid. So it's a very kind of a small board in those terms, not small physically, but like as far as the area goes. Now, in gameplay terms, I think if the board was much, much bigger, of course it would be harder to get around and it would take you longer to move. So I know that there were gameplay decisions that were made, and I'm sure that they were thoroughly play tested, because one of the things about this game is that it does always seem to be close. You either barely win or you just lost, and it's rare that I've had it where it's been a complete blowout one way or the other. And so I think the game was well play tested. It seems to be well balanced. I really enjoy it. The board itself is just something that I'm just not a huge fan of. The graphic design of it, the fonts that are used on it, the size of the cards that get laid on it, it's just something, it's really my only complaint about the game. Everything else about it is, an enjoyable experience, and I think that this is a really fun cooperative game that adds that unique kind of twist, that traitor element to it. And I think it really is something that, many people who enjoy cooperative games would really enjoy. So overall, for me, I would have to say that Police Precinct is definitely a winner. There are some things about this game that I wish could be improved. Some of the graphic kind of decisions that are made in the game, I would have liked to have seen some things done differently. But then other things are done exceedingly well. The art on the emergency cards I like. The art on the character cards I really like. The player aids are nice. The card stock is great. The thickness of the board is wonderful. Some of the art on the police cards, again, almost kind of had almost a little bit of a clip art kind of a feel to it, but very functional, really good, high quality production, especially for a young game company. I think that this was really an excellent foray for one of their first games, at least as far as I understand it. Really nice components, and I think that some of the other issues that I've kind of brought up as far from the graphic kind of design standpoint, I think those are the things that will continue to be improved on as the company continues to grow. From the gameplay standpoint, the game is a whole lot of fun. It's one that I would recommend to anyone who likes cooperative games. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It has some unique twists and turns and mechanisms in it that I haven't seen in other cooperative games, so it's not just a rehash or retread of what's already out there. And it's also a game that my kids really enjoy quite a bit. And one of the reasons that they like it is because of the theme, and also because, quite frankly, of the uncertainty of it. My kids do play Pandemic, and they kind of like it, but they sort of compare this one to Defenders of the Realm in that there is some dice rolling involved here. There's a little bit of luck, and that little bit of luck, that little bit of uncertainty adds that extra element of tension. And then when you add into that the traitor mechanic that they are so used to and they love so much from Shadows over Camelot, you have a game that they really enjoy as well. So Police Precinct, I think, is a game that you can play with gamers, and I think it's a game that you can play with your family, and it's one that I would recommend for fans of cooperative games. Finally, what I thought I would do today is I would ask my daughter, Sophia, to come and talk to me a little bit about this game, because one of the reasons that I got this game was that I wanted to play it with the family, because my kids are generally fans of cooperative games such as Flashpoint and Defenders of the Realm, etc. So Sophia here is my oldest daughter, and I'm going to ask her if she would like to share some thoughts about the game and things that she may like or dislike about it. So, Sophie, this is your first time doing a little bit of recording, other than when you were recorded at the WBC, right? Yeah. So, Sophie, we've played Police Precinct quite a few times. You've played games like Shadows over Camelot. You've played games like Flashpoint Fire Rescue. You even just learned how to play Pandemic not too long ago. So when you think about all of those games, okay, Flashpoint, Pandemic, Defenders of the Realm, and Shadows over Camelot, what is it about this game that you like when you think about cooperative games, or maybe some things that you don't like, or what are your thoughts about this one? What do you like?
Well, I like that it's cooperative, like you said, and Flashpoint was always one of my favorite games, so this reminded me a lot of that. And I really like, it's not like too complex, but it's complex enough that you don't get bored with it. There's so many different elements in the game that it's like new and fresh every time you play. I definitely like the unknown circumstances.
Right, like we had the one with the dog that attacked, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't just the robber; he had a dog with him, and so you say that it's not overly complicated, but there's enough going on, yeah?
Yeah. I don't like how, like, when the murderer comes out, I think he comes out too fast. I mean, we've played a lot, and the 2 times we have almost succeeded, he is on the corner, and we have to find a way to get to him. We don't find a way to get to him.
He just slips through our fingers at the last second, right?
Yeah, I think he just moves around too fast. He comes in so late in the game. He's there and then he's gone. It doesn't really give you time, because I mean, with the danger of the crime rate going up, and that can end the game, and street punks running out, and you have to deal with this and that, but then you get the murderer, and it's kind of like, I don't because you can't do anything about him until you have all the evidence.
Right.
And depending on how many players you have, it's harder to get evidence. And trying to deal with the crime rate is harder with less people. And when the murderer comes out, you can't really do anything about him. But if you split up and kind of take turns, which my brother does not do, he decides he wants to investigate the whole
He's
game.
terrible.
With the SWAT team.
My youngest son takes the SWAT commander every time, but he always wants to go and investigate in his marked car. I don't know exactly why he does that, but it kind of drives us crazy a little bit, doesn't it?
It does.
It does. Now, for those people who aren't familiar, I did talk about how the murderer comes out at a certain round in the game. And one of the things that I think Sophie's alluding to is that when you're playing with 5 players, he comes out, like you actually start the game further down on the round track than you would if you were only playing with like 2 players, because that will then give you more time. So I think from a playtesting standpoint, I think they obviously came up with those numbers for a reason, because when I have played with fewer people, with some adults and not just my kids, it really did seem to play out basically the same way. It's always very, very close between success and failure in this game. Sophie, if you had to compare this game to other cooperative games that you've played, like Flashpoint or Defenders of the Realm or Shadows over Camelot, which one would you say it's closest to? Because those are older games that people might really know more than they know this. So they might be interested which one you think it's closest to.
I haven't played Shadows over Camelot and nobody knows how long, but I relate this to Flashpoint only because of the almost the intensity of the you can lose in a matter of turns. In Flashpoint, if the fire gets out of hand and you can't do anything about it, well, you pretty much lost the game. It's if the crime, which this happened to us on our last game, if you let the crime get out of control, if you're too set on finding evidence or something like that, the whole time you're like, oh, just leave it, we have more to go on the crime rate. And that's what happened last game. It was my dad said, Sophie, just leave it. Come investigate. Even though I told him, no.
Well, it was getting close to him leaving the board, so we had to take our chances.
I said no.
All right. So,
but if the crime gets out of hand, that's like Flashpoint with the fire. I relate those 2 games together.
You know, I think that's a good point, because in Flashpoint, if you are all about the fire, but you don't get rid of victims, meaning, drag them to safety and bring them out, you're probably eventually going to lose the game. If you spend too much attention on just getting victims out and pay no attention to the fire, you're going to lose the game. So do you think that there's the same kind of balance there that you see in Flashpoint in this game?
Yes, and you were also talking about games like Defenders of the Realm. This game, compared to that, is the only way I find it similar when the minions come out, Defenders of the Realm. I find that kind of similar because it's another of, if you let them get out of control, you will lose the game. And it's not, I don't think, as complex as, it's complex, but it doesn't have this, much different elements as Flashpoint and Police Precinct. Because the whole name of the game in Defenders of the Realm is to get the 4 generals. And basically that's the main concept. And the only other concept you have is getting rid of their minions. Am I right about that?
Pretty much, yeah.
But in Police Precinct, you have to get the murderer, and you have to solve the evidence, and you have to keep the crime rate and figure out
emergency.
Right? And in Flashpoint, you have the same kind of thing. You have to make sure the fire is under control. You have to make sure you're getting hazmats out. You have to make sure you are playing the right role. You have to make sure. But it's like that. And Defenders of the Realm doesn't seem to have as many elements
Okay.
as these.
And you like that there's more elements, or you dislike
I like that there's more elements. I like that there's more elements because it gives you more to think about. If it's not your turn, like if basically while you're waiting for your turn, if it's not your turn, Defender of the Realm, you're basically waiting to see if someone will do what everybody else does. But when you're in Police Precinct, you have to see, well, what can I do next turn to make sure the emergencies are under control, and let's see if any more punks come out, if you have any street gangs, what the event cards are. I think it gives you much more to focus on. Like, as a kid, you get very distracted when it's not your turn. So, with Police Precinct and some other co-op games I've played, it gives you more to think about in most parts. It's just a little more, to think about.
So it keeps you more engaged, do you think?
It keeps you more engaged, I think so. Some people might say differently, but I think this would keep people more engaged.
So this is a game that you would recommend to people who like cooperative games, or no?
Yes.
Now, let me ask you one final question, because I've talked a lot in the review that I did before I asked you to join me, about how I kind of compare this game and how it stacks up to other cooperative games, and I've asked you the same questions. For games in general, though, like let's pretend that we're not just talking about cooperative games. How do you think this game stacks up to other games that you play in general?
I think that on favorites of games, it's pretty far up there. But for some people, it might be, if I love co-op games, this is my favorite game. But I enjoy co-op games, I like them, but they're not like my complete favorite. I like the secret identity games more than that, and actually Police Precinct brings that in.
Right.
With
the Dirty Cop.
The Dirty Cop, which we haven't played yet. Looking forward to playing that. But it's high up there. But I don't know if it's at the very top. So
if you had to give it a ranking on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, 1 being the worst, where would you put it?
Let's give it an 8.5.
An 8.5. Nice.
8.5. I like that number.
You like that number? Okay.
It's not a 9, but it's not an 8.
Okay, so because an 8's just terrible,
An 8's just terrible.
8 is not terrible. An 8's a good score.
You're not hitting double digits.
You know.
9, you're at least closer.
You're closer, huh? All right, so 8.5 and one of your favorite cooperative games. All right, great. Well, Sophie, I want to thank you for giving me your opinion on this, and I hope that listeners out there, kind of like and appreciate the idea of getting a kid's perspective on a game. I've never actually tried this before, and so you've been kind of my guinea pig for this, and so I want to thank you for taking the time in order to do that with me.
You're very welcome.
Now, before we end, I think it's also important for me to, let everybody know that the fine folks over there at Common Man Games did actually provide me with the review copy for this game. I've since played it quite a few times in order to prepare this quick look from the long view. All right, so for Sophia and myself, I want to say thanks to everybody out there who's listening. Police Precinct is definitely a fun and engaging and different cooperative game, and I would encourage you to check it out. That's Police Precinct from Common Man Games. Thank you for listening, and have a great night.